بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We're on hadith number 133, باب التيمم في الوضوء والغسل. Chapter about using your right or beginning with your right when making wudu and performing ghusl. عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها قالت كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يعجبه التيمم في تنعله وترجله وطهوره وفي شأنه كله. So Aisha رضي الله تعالى عنها, and Aisha, she says this about the Prophet. She had an observation about the Prophet ﷺ, and Aisha she knew her husband so well, like she could predict his actions. That's how well she knew him. رضي الله تعالى عنها. So she says that the Prophet used to prefer and used to love starting with his right when he would put on his shoes or whatever he's wearing on his feet, and when grooming his hair or beard, and when performing wudu, and in all of his affairs. Okay? So it is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that we should maintain that when we perform actions, we begin with our right. So when we do wudu, you have two arms, you have two legs, right? You start with your right arm, you start with your right foot. When you comb your hair or brush your hair or wash your hair, right, you start with the right side. Right? You take the comb, you start combing the right side, and then you do the left side. And when putting on your shoes, you put on your shoes you start with the right foot and then the left. When you enter the masjid, because Aisha says, in all of his affairs, when you enter the masjid, you enter with your right foot, right? Whether that's the doors of the masjid or the prayer hall, I don't think there's really much of a difference. I normally do it when entering the doors of the masjid. Same thing when it comes to brushing your teeth. Start with your right and go to the left. Same thing with cutting your nails. Start with your right hand and go to the left. Imam Nawawi even went to the extent starting with your right finger. Your furthest right finger. You start with the pinky, you go this way, and then you go this way. Right? And when you put a shirt on, right, or a jacket on, you put in your right arm first, and then your left. But if you remember, a few hadith ago, we said that if you relieve yourself, when you clean yourself, you use what hand? Your left. So, what's the deal here? Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says that all of his affairs. So there are some things that the Prophet ﷺ would use his right, he would begin with his right, and other things he would begin with his left. So is there a kind of rule of thumb that can simplify this for us? And the answer is yes. It's not a, perfect rule of thumb, but it's pretty general. And that is when you do something that is seen by Islam as dignifying the human being, now it's part of your honor and dignity, you begin with your right. Right? So, contrary to the Western world, Islam finds wearing clothing as more dignifying than not having clothing on. Right? So, when we put our clothes on, we start with our right arm, right leg. But when we remove our clothing, what do we remove first? The left arm, the left leg. Putting on shoes is, seen as more dignifying. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, because lack of a better term. That it's more dignifying than not having shoes on. So you put on your shoes with your right, you take off starting with your left, right? Entering the masjid is more preferable to us than when we're outside of the masjid. So when we enter with our right, and when we leave with our left, right? Entering the bathroom, we're entering a place where, so you start with your left, and when you leave the bathroom, you start with your right, right? Washing yourself is part of human dignity. Brushing your teeth, etc. So you start with the right side, and then the left, right? But washing impurities, you do it with your left, right? So this is a general rule. There might be some exceptions to that, but this is how we see it. باب التماس الوضوء إذا حانت الصلاة. the chapter about starting to find water when salah time approaches, right? So عن أنس رضي الله تعالى عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله تعالى عنه قال رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وحانت صلاة العصر فالتمس الناس الوضوء فلم يجدوه فأتي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بوضوء فوضع يده في ذلك الإناء وأمر الناس أن يتوضأوا منه فرأيت الماء ينبع من تحت أصابعه حتى توضأوا من عند آخرهم. So here, Anas radiallahu ta'ala an says that they were with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. The assumption is that they were traveling. Right? It's based on the context and what's going on. They were probably traveling. So Asr time was approaching. Right? Hanat Salat al-Asr. Either the time for Asr began to approach or the time for them when they were actually going to pray Salah. Either way, Salah is coming. So people were looking for water. They couldn't find water. So somebody came with a little bit of water and gave it to the Prophet ﷺ. And so the Prophet called the people to come and make wudu from it. So you have a large amount of people coming to make wudu from a bucket of water. Right? And Anas radiallahu ta'ala an says that the Prophet put his hand in the water and I could see the water increase. So one of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ. And they kept making wudu from it until all of them made wudu and there was still some water left over. So obviously our love for the Prophet ﷺ increases, and our longing to see him ﷺ increases when we hear something like this. And the point Al-Bukhari rahimahullah ta'ala wants to make in regards to where this hadith is placed in his compilation is not so much the miracle aspect of it, but rather the attachment. Right? When we say find water when salah is approaching, it's essentially saying your heart should be attached to salah to the extent that you're conscious of when salah is coming. Your mind already knows salah is coming soon. Where am I going to pray? Do I have water, etc. Right? Where am I going to make wudu? This is somebody whose heart is attached to salah. And so even when the time is approaching for salah, they're already making preparations. Right? Now, how does that look for us today? Obviously, unless you're in some very rare circumstance, you probably have water with you. All right? So you don't have to go and look for it. You're not going to come across such a situation. And if you don't have water with you, I'm sure you can find a gas station somewhere. I mean, even if you're out in the like no man's land, I mean, 50 miles, right? So even if you just passed up there's a gas station coming up, right, with water and stuff like that, and bathrooms. So what do we understand from this in terms of our times today is maybe not so much water, but when you go out, where are you going to pray? Right? I mean, in our times today, you're bound to commonly come across scenarios where you're out and it's time to pray. And you're not going to be back home in time. Right? So, are you conscious of where and when you're going to pray? Some people, okay, let's go to this area. We know there's a masjid close by. Or they're saying, okay, I'm going to this area. Let me look up masajid in that area. Alhamdulillah, if you're in a metropolitan area, you're going to find multiple masajid, right? Alhamdulillah, and, in our area, there's a masjid here, and across the corner there's another masjid, mashallah, right? That's one way of seeing it. Your heart is attached to salah to the extent that even before time for salah comes, you're already calculating, okay, where am I going to pray? Or maybe you're going somewhere for recreation. You're out in the desert, for example. Okay, where am I going to pray? Where's the qibla? Right? This is how people think. Or, you know what? I'm going to make sure I have wudu prior to leaving home so that I don't have to make wudu when it's time to pray. I already have it. So this is part of the meaning of this hadith, or at least the title of the hadith, that when salah, believers so attached to salah that they're already making preparations for salah before you're even going to pray it. Right? باب الماء الذي يغسل به شعر الإنسان. A chapter about the water that is used to wash a person's hair. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لما حلق رأسه كان أبو طلحة أول من أخذ من شعره. So Anas رضي الله تعالى عنه says that when the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام would cut his hair, Abu Talha, one of the companions, he was the first one to go and actually take the Prophet's hair and keep it for himself. People saw him doing that, so they started doing that. So what's the deal here? Because this is a big question. Right? The question of barakah, blessings. Where is that coming from? Because some people are going to see this as the Prophet himself is the source of barakah. And so they take, reminiscences of the Prophet ﷺ, or hair or whatever. You go to Turkey, there's a museum where there's the Prophet's hair, there's the Prophet's stick, there's the Prophet's bowl, whatever. And you really scratch your head and say, how does this stuff still exist 1400 years later? But whatever, let's just say it's real, okay? When the companions took some of the residue of the Prophet ﷺ, his wudu, his hair, Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu ta'ala an had a strand of the Prophet's hair that he put on his helmet, right? Why did they do that? Some people are going to explain it, that there's barakah in it. If that's with you, then you have barakah, you're going to do better, right? What I say to this is getting close to shirk, or borderline shirk, if not shirk. And then they get upset and they start saying, this is love of the Prophet, you don't love the Prophet. No, hold on. Wait here. Okay? Why am I saying it's borderline shirk? Well, number one, it begs the question, where do you see the barakah coming from? Rasulullah alayhi salatu wasalam, or Rabbil Alameen? When the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he himself said, do not do to me, do not praise me the way Christians praise Isa alayhi salam, to where they started worshipping him. You think the Christians worship Isa alayhi salam out of self-love? They do out of love of him. When the Christians, they adore Isa alayhi salam, they love him, right? Forget about these fanatics. I'm talking about the average Christian who, is committed to their faith. You cannot deny their love of Isa alayhi salam. They love him. And they love him so much that when they actually see Islam's portrayal of Isa, they say, I came to Islam because of Isa alayhi salam, right? But at the same time, when that love becomes exaggerated, it becomes unhealthy, right? And to give you the practical side of this is point number 2. Imagine you believe that so long as you have this strand of hair from the Prophet, you're going to do well. Yeah. What is going to happen to you when you forget to bring that strand of hair with you and you're out and about and you forget it? How are you going to feel? Oh my God, today's going to be a terrible day, etc. So what is the heart really attached to? The thing, not Allah. That's where the shirk comes in. Because if you look at shirk as a philosophy, if you look at it in fact psychologically, shirk, why Allah despises it so much, is not because it degrades anything of Him. It doesn't matter. Whether Allah is worshipped or not, Allah is perfection. Allah is the praiseworthy, whether people praise Him or not. Allah is the king, whether people submit to Him or not. Right? Whether people worship other than Him or not does not change anything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's all about how it affects us. Right? When the heart becomes attached to physical entities, you see how it manipulates our emotions depending on how near we are to it or not. Right? This is the problem. And so, do you really think the companions felt uneased if they forgot something of the Prophet's hair or cloak, do you think they felt that? Absolutely not. Okay, so why did they do it? And I say the answer has nothing to do with thinking that there's barakah by having it, but rather in their love of the Prophet, they respected and revered everything about him. So Khalid ibn Walid didn't have a strand of the Prophet's hair in his helmet thinking that it brings him barakah, but rather he did it out of love of the Prophet, to the extent that he does not want even a hair, like he felt responsible to protect a hair of his. It's out of love of the Prophet they did that. And it's from their love of the Prophet Allah rewarded them. That's very different. That's very different than the first model. If I had something of the Prophet, if you had something of the Prophet, wouldn't you protect it and store it? And why? Out of your love for the Prophet. And it is in your love of the Prophet Allah gives you the barakah. But let's just say you forgot it. It's not with you at home. Okay, it's protected. So whether it's physically with me or not is irrelevant to this mindset, to this approach. And I don't see my victory in battle or anything like that as a result of having the strand of the Prophet's hair with me, but rather in terms of my love and my application of the sunnah of Rasulullah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us victory. Right? قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Excuse me. Say, if you truly love Allah, follow the Prophet, and Allah will love you. Right? So, Allahu Alam, that's the way I've come to understand it. We don't want our hearts attached to anyone but Allah. Our love for the Prophet is an extension of Allah commanding us to love him. Our following of the Prophet is an extension of Allah commanding us to follow the Prophet. It's about Allah. Right? And our emulation of the Prophet is because he is a reflection of the Quran, which is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Prophet is a physical manifestation of what Allah wants from us. And so we love him. Also, the Prophet ﷺ, how he engaged humanity is a physical representation of how Allah engages humanity. And so think of this. If you want to know maybe how Allah would react to something you did, imagine yourself going to Rasulullah and telling him. How would he react? Imagine you did something wrong and you went to Rasulullah and you told him, Rasulullah, I did this. What would his reaction be? Because he reacts in accordance to what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He would get mad, not for himself, but what he knows makes Allah mad. And so if the Prophet's mad, that's big. And there were times the Prophet ﷺ got mad. But there were times people went to the Prophet and told me, Rasulullah, I did X, Y, and Z, I did this sin, I did that sin. And the Prophet was very non-reactionary. So okay, just do this and that. Right. He is the representation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right?
What
Yes.
does that have to do with the title of that?
I don't know. I don't know what the relationship between the hadith and the title of the chapter is. Right? But remember, it's a human being who wrote this. باب إذا شرب الكلب في إناء أحدكم. A chapter about when a dog drinks from a vessel or a plate of yours. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال إن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إذا شرب الكلب في إناء أحدكم فليغسله سبعا. Abu Hurairah رضي الله تعالى عنه says that if a dog drinks from a vessel of yours, something that you use for food, like a utensil, a plate, then wash it 7 times. Right? In another hadith, use dirt for one of those times. All right? So, I don't know if there are other hadith about dogs. In Bukhari, might come very later on, but I might as well say it. There are 4 reasons a person might have a dog. 1, as a guard. 2, for shepherding. 3, for farming. 4, as a pet. As a pet. And you can add today 5 as a service animal. You know, sometimes you have a blind person, they have a dog, or someone who, whatever. Right? Sometimes you find these service dogs with people who are, mashallah, they seem like they're all fit and everything, and then it kind of scratches your head. Right? Anyway.
Anxiety.
Anxiety?
It's for anxiety.
Seriously?
Yeah, I swear.
Whatever. So you have a 5th reason. 4 of them, you're allowed to have a dog for that reason. 1 of them, you're not allowed, as a pet. As a pet. People come and say, Shaykh, if I have a dog, but I'm going to keep him outside all the time, is that okay? It's not about the impurity of the dog that makes it haram. A donkey is impure. A mule is impure. You're still allowed to have it. A cat is technically impure, but the Prophet made an exception for cats because it's always around humans, right? You can have it as a pet. You can have a mouse as a pet, technically, right? According to some scholars. Gross, but it's still impure. It has nothing to do with the impurity of the dog, right? So keeping it outside, inside is irrelevant to the question. It is a question of why do you have that dog? If you have the dog because you want it as a pet, whether it's always inside or always outside or between or whatever, it's still a pet. And the Prophet ﷺ says, "Man iktana kalban nuqisa min ajrihi qirat kulla yawm." Right? أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. The Prophet says, whoever has a dog as a pet will lose 1/24 of their hasanat, a qirat, every single day. Right? It's pretty serious. Right? Well, there's nothing here that says clearly that it's haram. The only time you lose hasanat is when you do a sin. The only time. Right? So the fact that it results in loss of hasanat means what? It is haram. Okay? Oh, what's the big deal? It's a dog. We can theorize as to the reasoning behind it. The perhaps reasoning that I have come across is because the human mind releases oxytocin when it engages with a dog. You know, they call it man's best friend, right? They don't call a cat a man's best friend. They call a dog a man's best friend. SubhanAllah, if the research is true, the human being, the brain reacts to engaging with the dog the way it reacts to engaging with their child. Right? The same, it doesn't seem to be true with a cat. The dog, yes. Right? Okay, so what? What that means is the attachment, the bond between the human and the dog is similar to between the human and their child or their parent or their sibling, etc. Right? What's wrong with that? It's because that's an animal and that's a human being. That's what's wrong with it. An animal does not equate to a human being in Islam. And you see these people, like you see people who are dog owners, right? Wallahi, I heard somebody, once there was a guy walking, he had these 2 big dogs, big. And so he's just walking around, the guy came to him and said, "Can you take the dogs away? I mean, you're scaring people." And the guy reacted saying, "If you say something about my dogs, I'll kill you." Right? That's unnatural. It's unnatural. Right? I mean, you have some people who put a portion of their money for their dog. Right? So this is abnormal human behavior. I should say this is abnormal human attachment. Islam doesn't say be mean to dogs. Quite the contrary. Be kind to dogs. Right? But in terms of having it as a pet, we don't like that. It's not going to happen. Okay, well, what if you have it for those other reasons? In the end, you're going to engage the dog. He's going to be walking with you. You're going to have a type of bond with it. Yeah, but there's a purpose behind it. Right? It's different than saying, I just have this dog as a pet to keep me company versus I have this dog as a guard. Right? There's a certain function this dog plays, and if the dog no longer plays that function, then the relationship shifts. Right? And this is true even for human relationships. If somebody marries someone else just for their money, that's very different than if they marry them thinking that I could build a family with this person. Right? So it does make a difference. All right. So Abu Hurairah says that if a dog drinks or eats from a plate or bowl or vessel of yours, to wash it 7 times. And without going into all the fiqh details and whatnot, this is unique to dogs, right? And what that means is there seems to be something specific about the saliva of dogs that is only in dogs. And so if a pig were to eat from a vessel of yours, some scholars said you still have to wash it 7 times because of this hadith. But other scholars say no, there's no analogy here. And so if a pig eats from something of yours, you wash it once, that's it. And this 7 stuff is only specific to dogs. And I hear that there's some research that say there's certain bacteria that needs extra cleaning in order for it to die or to be killed. Whatever the case is, you could do the research on your own. And in another hadith, as I mentioned, the Prophet ﷺ says, one of these times should be done with dirt. So dirt has certain properties that cleans. This is why you see some people, if they're out in the wilderness and their hands are dirty and they have no soap or anything, they use dirt and they just kind of scrub there, right? It frolics, whatever the science is. But the scholar said that soap takes the place of dirt. Any cleaning agent takes the place of that dirt. And so technically, if a dog eats from your plate, you toss it in the dishwasher and you put those pods or whatever, that's enough. That's soap. That cleans it, right? Okay. عن عبد الله بن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما قال كانت الكلاب تقبل وتدبر في المسجد في زمان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فلم يكونوا يرشون شيئا من ذلك. يرشون شيئا من ذلك. Oh, okay. So Ibn Umar radiallahu ta'ala says, this is interesting, that dogs would come and go in the Prophet's masjid, alayhi salatu wasalam. So imagine, the masjid, there's a dog coming and going, etc. The masjid was open, there weren't any doors or anything like that. And they wouldn't spray any water from behind them. Again, I get this question a lot. People who have dogs, Muslims who have dogs, and say, Sheikh, if I have a dog, but we don't let him in a certain room so that, we can do salah. That's not the way impurity works. Impurity, there needs to be something left behind. Just stomping on it without there being any residue means that impurities have not been transferred. So here, you have the dogs coming and going, and they're not cleaning the masjid. They're praying in that area. Remember, they don't have rugs. They're praying on the dirt, right? So just because a dog walks somewhere doesn't make that place impure. Right? And the same thing applies if a dog rubs their body on you. Sometimes they come, they'll rub their body on you. Right? Do you see any wetness? No, it's not impure. Licking, on the other hand, there's saliva. You have to wash that. Petting a dog, nothing wrong with petting a dog. Just because we don't have dogs as pets doesn't mean we can't pet dogs. But petting a dog does not make your hand impure unless you see its sweat or some wetness that comes from the dog. Its hair, it's not impure, right? Because the hair doesn't have biological life in it. Right? So that impurity does not transfer to it, it's just hair. Now, in another hadith, not mentioned here, the companion said, and it's relevant to this last hadith that we just talked about, dogs coming and going, the reason this was happening is because there was a lot of wild dogs in Medina when the Prophet first immigrated. A lot. You know how there's a lot of mice these days? I don't know if you hear in this area. They're everywhere, right? Everywhere. And wallahi, the other day I was barbecuing with my family, and my son is sitting on a chair, and it's like it's open from under, and he's eating corn. My son loves corn. He's eating a corn, this rat this size, just comes, sits right under him, waiting for some of the, the chips of the corn to fall down. And my son is okay. He's everyone else is freaking out, and Alma's just sitting there. He's like, whatever. So I took a towel and I whacked the rat, and he came back. Right? And they're just coming and going. And anyway, there was
something available.
it wasn't at a house or anything. It's outside.
Yeah, even outside. There's a little device like frequency. We don't hear, but they hear. So we have it in our garage in the backyard. They don't come anymore.
Right. So anyway, sometimes in areas there's a infestation of an animal. The numbers increase. Happens in Florida with iguanas, and so they give people money for every iguana that they kill. So you have these, mashallah, these Floridans going around. They're happy, and they're shooting these iguanas, and they're having fun, and they get paid for it, right? So this stuff happens. There was a dog infestation in Medina, right? Many of whom were rabid dogs. So they're running around. So the Prophet ﷺ comes and he says, go kill the dogs. Right? And they were the companions, Rasulullah said, and they're killing all the dogs. Like they said, we didn't leave any dog until we just completely almost wiped out the dog population. And then the Prophet said, okay, what's wrong with you guys? Relax, right? We just wanted to reduce the numbers, not completely cause them to go extinct. Why do I mention this? Because some people will come and say, why is the Prophet commanding killing dogs? Or some people, a lot in our ethnicities, we hate dogs, right? We hate dogs, and whatnot. They'll go and they say, the Prophet ﷺ said to go and kill dogs. This isn't a general command. It was a specific command for a specific reason, right? So if there is an animal infestation, then yeah, Islam gives us the green light to kill it, whether it's dogs or iguanas or mice or whatever. And the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned 5 animals that you're allowed to kill anytime, any place. Even if you're in Mecca. In Mecca, you're not allowed to kill animals. It's a sacred land. There's these 5 exceptions. What are they? Mice, snakes, scorpions, rabid dogs, and there's a certain type of crow or a raven. Not the ones we see here. It has like a white dot on its beak, right? These 5.
What is the rabid dog?
A dog with rabies.
Oh, rabies. Oh.
Yeah, called rabbit, right? These 5. Why? The Prophet ﷺ called them al-fasiqat, or al-fuwaysiqat. They are problem makers. Mice come with disease. Rabid dogs, obviously, they can kill people. Okay? Snakes are very threatening to the human being. What else? Scorpions are very threatening to human beings. What's the deal with these birds? This type of bird will go and destroy crops. It destroys crops. I don't know if the ravens around us do that, but there's certain types of ravens or crows that destroy crops. So the Prophet says these are problem makers. We're not going to let our lives be damaged or harmed or even killed because of our compassion towards animals. So you take a general idea here that human life has more sanctity than animal life. Right? Human life is given precedence over animal life. And there's a mindset here, right? That I, as a human being, Allah has given me more dignity than the animal, and for that reason, Allah has subdued animals to our needs, not the opposite. And while it's perfectly fine for Muslims to have cats and other types of pets, nothing wrong with that, ethically speaking, we need to teach our kids that, in the end, that's supposed to serve you, not the opposite. Not the opposite. Like, I'm sorry, with all due respect to dog owners, when they're walking around, they're cleaning up the poop of dogs, right? And then you ask them, why don't you have kids? Oh, it's too much of a responsibility, and you have to clean its diapers and whatnot. Well, you're doing the same thing.
Except kids after 2-3 years will stop. The dog, you have it forever.
Right? So you see how it's like you've completely missed the point of the human being. You completely missed the point of the human being. And this is the result of theories of evolution and all this nonsense. Oh, you were a monkey. And then they look at animals to justify human behaviors. Oh, animals do that, so that means we can do it. It's unbelievable. Like, what are you doing to the human being? No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have given dignity to Bani Adam, the child of Adam. And part of that dignity is that big animals like horses and camels and cows and bulls are subdued to our will. A 5-year-old will take the reins of a camel that is 10 times its size, that can kill it literally with one kick, and will just follow it. That's Allah telling the human being, I have given you dignity. One of the functions of these animals is to serve your purpose, not the opposite. Again, we treat animals kindly. That is the way the Prophet ﷺ did it, with dignity, etc. But with the same mentality of, I know my place, I know the place of this animal. All right. باب من لم يرى الوضوء إلا من المخرجين. I don't even know how to translate this. لا يزال العبد في صلاة ما دام لم يرى الوضوء. So I'm guessing what the chapter means is, for the scholars who say that the only thing that invalidates wudu is what comes out of number 1 and number 2. Right? This is what I think the chapter means. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال العبد في صلاة ما دام في المسجد ينتظر الصلاة ما لم يحدث. So here the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام says that a Muslim is in the state of salah so long as they are in the masjid waiting for salah, so long as they don't invalidate their wudu, right? So if you come, let's say 10 minutes early for salah, or let's say once class is done, you go down, you do your sunnahs, and you're waiting 5 minutes or so until Dhuhr prayer, that time you get the reward as though you are in salah, right? Why? You're in the masjid with wudu waiting for salah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you for that by giving you the reward as though you are in salah. But the idea here is ma lam yuhdith, that you have wudu so long as a hadath, an occasion, which is understood in the Arabic language as meaning something coming out of number 1 or number 2. Right? Falling asleep is not considered a hadath, linguistically speaking. Right? It's not considered an occasion, for the lack of a better translation, even though we know that it does break wudu. عن زيد بن خالد رضي الله تعالى عنه قال سألت عثمان بن عفان رضي الله تعالى عنه قلت أرأيت إذا جامع فلم يمني قال عثمان يتوضأ كما يتوضأ للصلاة ويغسل ذكره. قال عثمان سمعته من رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فسألت عن ذلك عليا والزبير وطلحة وأبي بن كعب فأمروني بذلك. I think I'm just going to skip this one just because I don't think you all want to hear me say it. Let's put it that way. So the next hadith, عن أبي سعيد الخدري رضي الله تعالى عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أرسل إلى رجل من الأنصار فجاء ورأسه يقطر فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لعلنا أعجلناك فقال نعم. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أعجلت أو قحطت فعليك الوضوء. Once again, pretty sensitive material here that I don't think you all would be comfortable with me talking about. What is it? It's about men too. Okay, but men watch, right? Anyway, باب الرجل يوضأ صاحبه. الرجل باب الرجل يوضئ صاحبه. The chapter about somebody performing wudu for someone else. Right? Oh, don't say what? You've all asked me about an elderly person who can't do wudu on their own. Can I do wudu for them? That's it.
When you
Yeah.
have daughters, like I have a daughter,
عن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه كان مع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم في سفر وأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم ذهب لحاجة له وأن مغيرة جعل يصب الماء عليه وهو يتوضأ فغسل وجهه ويديه ومسح برأسه ومسح على الخفين. So basically here, Al-Mughira radiallahu ta'ala an says that he was traveling with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Prophet used the bathroom, and then Al-Mughira was holding a vessel of water. He would pour it for the Prophet while the Prophet would perform wudu. So whether it's like that or whether somebody actually pouring the water on someone else's hand and washing it for them, either way, that is a valid way of performing wudu. Right? So,
I thought that like if I make wudu and someone else is the Lord.
no.
Yeah.
So, what this is telling us is, in order for my wudu to be valid, number one, I don't have to directly engage the water myself. Someone else can do that for me. And number two, I don't have to use my own hands to wash the areas. Right? So long as washing occurs, whether I use my hands or not, doesn't matter.
That makes sense.
So, what does this mean? If you're in a pool, right? You're swimming in a pool, and you want to make wudu. Now, aside from the Hanafi opinion, where so long as you put yourself in the water, you're good to go, for the rest of the schools, there has to be intentionality there. So, imagine that I am submerged in water, and I want to make wudu while I'm just kind of chilling underwater. So what do I do? I need to wash my face, right? So I make intention, I'm making wudu, and I'm washing my face. Well, there's water all over my face. So my face is being washed. And then I switch my intention to my arms, right? And then I switch my intention to my hair. But hair, wipe. Wipe, there has to be some sort of physical object touching and wiping the head. So unlike washing, it's different. So I'll have to do this, or someone else does it for me. And then I make intention that I'm going to wash my feet, and I'm washing my right foot, I'm washing my left foot. Even though I don't use my hands, the water is doing it for me. That's wudu right there, right? So for the common question of, I have an elderly parent, whoever, and they can't perform wudu on their own, can I do it for them? Or whoever is sick, can I do it for them? The answer is yes. باب قراءة القرآن بعد الحدث وغيره. The chapter about reciting Quran without wudu. Alright. عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما أنه بات ليلة عند ميمونة زوج النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم ورضي الله عنها وهي خالته. Remember, several weeks ago I made a mistake. I'm like, who's Ibn Abbas? And it was a nice blunder in my mind. So Maymuna is the aunt of Ibn Abbas. Maymuna is the aunt of Ibn Abbas. Abbas is the uncle of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Right? So the Prophet's uncle, right? His wife had a sister who's married to the Prophet. So Ibn Abbas's mother, so his khala, his maternal aunt, is the wife of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Okay, so that's why he was able to get access to the home of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So فاضطجعت في عرض الوسادة واضطجع رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وأهله في طولها فنام رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم حتى إذا انتصف الليل أو قبله بقليل أو بعده بقليل استيقظ رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فجلس يمسح النوم عن وجهه بيده ثم قرأ العشر الآيات الخواتم من سورة آل عمران ثم قام إلى شن معلقة فتوضأ منها فأحسن وضوءه ثم قام يصلي قال فقمت فصنعت مثل ما صنع ثم ذهبت فقمت إلى جنبه فوضع يده اليمنى على رأسي وأخذ بأذني اليمنى يفتلها فصلى ركعتين ثم ركعتين ثم ركعتين ثم ركعتين ثم ركعتين ثم ركعتين ثم أوتر ثم اضطجع حتى أتاه المؤذن فقام فصلى ركعتين خفيفتين ثم خرج فصلى الصبح وقد تقدم هذا الحديث في كل منهما ما ليس في الآخر. So a longer hadith that we already went over previously, so I'm not going to repeat that. But the additional piece of information here that's relevant to the chapter title is that the Prophet, Ibn Abbas says that he slept over by the Prophet, he went to sleep, the Prophet went to sleep, the Prophet woke up for Qiyam al-Layl. Right? And so Ibn Abbas, when the Prophet woke up, he woke up as well. And so he says that the first thing the Prophet did is kind of wipe the sleepiness off of him. So he kind of rubbed his face, got the sleepiness out, and he recited the last 10 verses of Surah Ali Imran. What's the point here? He recited the verses before making wudu. Right? Because Ibn Abbas says that after he recited the verses, he got up and made wudu and he prayed. All right? So what this tells us is you don't have to have wudu to recite Quran. You don't have to have wudu to recite Quran. However, you cannot be in a state of major spiritual impurity because that you're not allowed to recite Quran in that state. Right? You're not allowed to recite Quran while in a state of major spiritual impurity until you perform ghusl. Right? But what you can do in a state of major spiritual impurity is recite the Quran in your mind without moving your lips. You can do it in your mind without moving your lips.
What's the major spiritual impurity?
يعني اللي بيحتاج غسل.
Oh,
That which you need to perform ghusl as a result of, that's major spiritual impurity. Okay?
I thought kufr يعني.
No. يعني what's the Arabic term? Janaba. Yeah. Right?
So,
Hold on. So that's one. You can recite the Quran without wudu. Can you hold the mushaf without wudu? Some scholars said no, some scholars say yes. My opinion is that you can hold the mushaf. You can switch the pages from the corners. You just cannot touch the physical writing of the Quran because that's what's sacred. The pages on which the Quran is printed is not sacred in of itself. The binding, the hardcover is not sacred in of itself. What's sacred are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, if it's in physical form, you cannot touch it. If it's in digital form, you open the Quran on an app, that's fine. You can touch it because it's not physical. Alright? So that's my opinion in that regard. And we'll go ahead and stop here. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. We stopped at hadith number 143.